This is a relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
A worst nightmare type situation in our home city, Edmonton, right at City Hall. The afternoon after we've wrapped up our episode of Real Talk. This was just yesterday. If you're listening live, January 23rd, good morning. It's January 24th, and we're still wrapping our minds around an armed gunman walking unhindered into Edmonton's City Hall with the mayor and councillors there, meetings going on, a grade 1 class, elementary school students there as a gunman opens fire, shattering glass, deploying a Molotov cocktail, ultimately detained by a hero, an unarmed commissionaire, a security guard, until police could get on scene to make that arrest. With charges pending, the city of Edmonton now wrapping its mind around what could have been an absolute disaster. In just a second, we'll speak with Edmonton's mayor. We'll then talk to an Edmonton city councillor, Tim Cartmell. What is the answer here? What is the appropriate response? What is the message to the average citizen? And to those that might be looking at the supercharged nature of politics today and wondering how society needs to reflect and perhaps better protect its politicians. This conversation is presented by the team at Verifiable Credentials. If you've been paying attention to headlines across the country over the past year or so, you know that credential fraud is on the rise. Whether it's nurses or oil patch workers, personal support workers, fake credentials are putting people's personal safety at risk. Luckily, there's an innovative technology that's making credential fraud a thing of the past. Digital verifiable credentials are secure, cloud-based credentials that go way beyond traditional certificates, and they can't be forged either. They're tamper-proof, they're independently verifiable, they live in a digital wallet, and they can be shared from anywhere. And with We Know Training, they can plug seamlessly into your training courses. If you want to learn more about using verifiable credentials in your training or credentialing program, visit verifiablecredentials.ca. So it's business as usual on January 23rd at Edmonton City Hall until this happens.
Risks as well that we need to continue to work on.
Okay. So let's have that conversation, right? And
absolutely.
We'll follow up on it of 9.
You can hear that voice, close the doors, as people snap into action. That was the voice of Edmonton's Mayor Amarjeet Sohi you're hearing. He'll be joining us in 30 seconds. As police arrive on scene, as an arrest is made, unbelievably no injuries, let alone fatalities. Edmonton's Police Chief Dale McPhee addresses the city.
At approximately 10:25 this morning, the Edmonton Police Service received reports of shots fired at City Hall. Within minutes, officers arrived and took one adult male into custody. We believe this individual acted alone. The suspect entered City Hall through the parkade. He then proceeded through City Hall with a firearm, firing multiple shots and shattering glass within the building. In addition to the firearm, the suspect was heavily armed with several handled incendiary devices, which we believe to be Molotov cocktails, causing one small fire outside of an elevator. EPS members and City Hall security responded within minutes, putting the building on lockdown and determined the suspect. It is also worth noting that it's an unarmed commissionaire that initially detained this individual. His actions were above and beyond, and for that we are grateful while the officers got there. And bomb unit cleared City Hall to confirm there were no injuries or casualties.
Edmonton's Mayor Amarjeet Sohi joining us live. Mayor, obviously a remarkable circumstance, a tragedy averted, but I would imagine nobody's feeling normal this morning. How are you wrapping your mind around what happened yesterday? How are you doing?
Well, first of all, Ryan, thank you so much for having me. We are going to grapple with this situation as effectively as we can. It's a terrifying situation, something that you do not expect to be happening anywhere in the city, let alone in a place where decisions are made, and which is a community place where people gather, work, and come to engage with city council. So, we're going to assess the situation, but I want to assure everyone listening to your show that the people who have been impacted by this traumatic event, particularly those who work at City Hall, whether they're political staff, whether they are city administration and city clerk's office, anyone that we hear your pain, we hear your trauma, and support is available for you through our employee services. Please access that support and continue to support each other.
It's remarkable audio and video. Maybe you can shine some light onto us on exactly what was happening. You're chairing a meeting. There's shots fired, I would imagine. I won't put words in your mouth, and you didn't guess it was gunfire. What did you think was happening? And tell us about those first few moments after those shots were fired.
So we were in the middle of the meeting, and I was asking questions to our city manager about how we are preparing for a dry season because we haven't seen much snow this year. Province is preparing for a dry season. So I was asking, how are we preparing to protect our river valley? And all of a sudden, I heard 3 loud bang noises, and I paused for a bit and didn't think much of it because sometimes you see disturbances at City Hall. I thought maybe it is one of those incidents. Then we heard further noise. That's when one of the commissioners walked in and told us that there was an active shooter in City Hall, and the doors were locked. And our city clerk, I want to commend her, took control of the situation, kept everyone in calm, and within seconds we were told that the person has been apprehended and that things were under control. So that was a relief to know. It was shocking, absolutely shocking, but how quickly the city security, the commissioners acted and got handle of the situation was also a relief.
Can you give us a sense of what your first few moments and then the hours afterward were like for you? Is there a protective detail? What happens in a situation like this?
No, we were directed to the muster point by the city clerk, and everyone followed, which is very, very important to follow those instructions and remain calm. And then direction was given for city council members to go to a safe place, which we all did. And then I've been working from home, connecting with city clerk, my office, city manager, my office, trying to support each other, staying in touch with council, at the same time making sure that we are supporting whichever way we can with the investigation. I think, Ryan, is very, very important to tell Edmontonians that the way the situation was handled by the Commissionaire, how quickly EPS showed up and the fire department showed up and peace officers showed up. It was remarkable to see the rapid response to control the situation. I want to convey my deepest appreciation to everyone who was helping with that situation, from city clerk to security guards and EPS and fire and everyone else involved, as well as how our city manager has been supporting city staff impacted by it and how he's been keeping us in the loop.
I understand that we'll perhaps be receiving more details from Edmonton Police, including charges laid here. What do you know, if anything, about the alleged shooter? What do you know about any potential motivation?
I think it is very important, Ryan, that as politicians, we let EPS do its work, do the investigation, and they can share the accurate information. People should not be speculating on the situation because we need to remain calm, and our city needs to remain united and supportive of each other and continue to exercise compassion and care toward each other, and do not speculate on the situation and let the EPS do its work.
My understanding is that many staff members and others were sheltering in place. Did you have a chance to connect with them? And if so, what were those conversations like?
Yes, we have remained in contact with my staff and other staff as well, and my chief of staff has been remained in touch and worked together with the city manager's office to keep appraised of the the situation. There were kids in City Hall, and they were provided the right support. Everyone acted together. Everyone absolutely supported each other, and obviously there will be a review of the security protocols once things calm down a bit, and we will look at what precautionary measure needs to be taken in the future.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that because it's I mean, for the most part, members of the public can walk uninterrupted and unhindered right into City Hall. I know that you have spoken on this in past, as of other elected officials. You're trying to balance the priority of safety of the mayor and councillors and staff, as well as sort of that open access to the public, kind of the spirit of what a city hall and what council chambers are supposed to be all about. Now, there is obviously a metal detector if you want to walk into council chambers, but even that is staffed by a commissionaire, an unarmed commissionaire, one of them obviously an absolute hero, and I hope that they'll be recognized in some way. Maybe you can comment on that in just a little bit, but how are you reconciling this right now? Really what comes across as maybe security measures that need to be improved, while at the same time keeping that democratic town hall, that city hall, so to speak, open for people?
I think it's our fundamental responsibility to make sure that people who work at City Hall, and there's a lot of people who do work at City Hall, are safe, that we are creating a safe work environment, and also creating safe environment for people to come to City Hall and engage, at the same time keeping it as a community space, which it has always been a community space. So I think we would have to strike that balance. We will rely on professionals to give us guidance how we can strike that balance. But it is very important that that City Hall it remains an open, accessible space for everyone to come in at the same time, making sure that people who work there have the comfort that they can walk into that place and feel for their safety.
Let me ask you about elected officials in particular. You know, you're advised to leave the scene. I suspect that's what you told us. You've got a team of security that gets you off the property and away from City Hall, and you've got like a grade 1 class that's still there. You've got your council colleagues that are still there. Do we need to look? And at this time, not even knowing the motivation of the shooter. Like, we don't know, and it feels weird to say this to your face, but like, we don't know if they were there for you. We don't know if they were there for a counselor. We don't know if they were there because of mental illness. We don't know if they were there because, for what, I don't even want to start speculating and filling in the blanks. Do we need to start looking at whether or not more than just the mayor needs protective detail? Do we need to start looking at security details for counselors? Do we need to start looking at overhauling the entire structure of the system?
Yeah. Ryan, I really appreciate you stressing the point that we should not speculate on the motive, because we don't know what the motive was. And we will leave that to the professionals to determine. It is also important that in a situation like this, that we provide that leadership, comforting the community coming from politicians, but we also need to step away from the actual management of these kind of crises, because we don't have that expertise. It's the professionals that have that expertise. So we follow the advice, in which we did. I'm very appreciative of everyone, relying on that information and following the guidance. As far as I think we have to revisit. We have to look at and how we create spaces that continue to be open and accessible, continue to provide that opportunity for engagement, at the same time making sure that people who work in these places are protected, whether they're elected officials, whether they're political staff or other administrative staff in those buildings.
Mayor, what can you tell us about this commissionaire that stopped this, that potentially prevented fatalities? We know that this person is unarmed. Can you give us some insight into who they are, how long they've been there, and maybe what plans the city may have at this early stage in recognizing them or thanking them for what they did?
Oh, absolutely. We will definitely, figure out a way to recognize the bravery of that particular individual, as well as other commissioners and EPS and other frontline staff that helped handle this this situation. What I know is that this commissioner has worked at City Hall for a while, and he knows City Hall really well. And there are other commissioners. I also understand that it has been a traumatic event for them as well, right?
Totally.
And we need to make sure that they're properly supported during this very difficult time.
Mayor Sohi, I want to thank you for making time for us on a morning where I'm sure you're still wrapping your mind around what happened. I think it's safe to say that most people in the city of Edmonton and probably across the country are as well. I mean, I'm just thinking of that class of kids that was down there and how this will impact them likely for the rest of their lives. I want to thank you for making yourself.
Ryan, it is okay. It is okay to feel anxiety. It is okay to feel that trauma. It has been a very traumatic event. So I want to assure Edmontonians that we will do what needs to be done to ensure that that balance is struck and that people continue to feel safe, and let's continue to support each other. This is a very difficult time for our city and for many people who work there, and let's continue to stand with each other, continue to show compassion for each other, continue to care for each other, and we will get through this together.
That's Edmonton Mayor Amarjeet Sohi. Thank you for your availability. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
You bet. Another elected official that was there at City Hall as this happened is Edmonton Councillor Tim Cartmell. And everyone's story will be different on what the experience was like as we welcome him the morning after. An armed gunman opens fire at Edmonton City Hall, blowing out glass windows, deploying a Molotov cocktail, ultimately detained by an unarmed security guard. Thank you, Councillor Cartmell, for joining us. Just obviously, I guess, a number of hours after this all went down. How are you feeling? How are you wrapping your mind around this? What can you tell us in these early stages?
Ryan, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you okay.
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry. All my current tech is locked in my office. So I'm trying to get old iPads and old laptops to function here. I think we're all still processing just what happened yesterday. I was in my office at City Hall. I was attending the meeting virtually, and yeah, it was a pretty surreal experience. I can sort of take you through what we were doing if you like.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so I was there with my staff. We were in our council office, and for those, I think most have been to City Hall, but the council offices are essentially positioned technically on the third floor above the committee room, the River Valley room, and the meeting was taking place in the River Valley room. And, we heard the loud bangs in the building. We heard them through the virtual stream into our office. And it's not the first time you hear sort of a noise out in the city room, people setting up for an event, that kind of a thing, but it was a little bit different. And we saw the meeting pause, and then we saw people sort of scrambling in the room, and we weren't quite sure what was going on. And it's my guess. It's still early days. We don't have a lot of details, but I think what happened was the Molotov cocktail that caused the small fire also caused the fire alarms to go off. So when the fire alarms went off, we evacuated according to the fire alarm, and not really realizing what was going on. And coincidentally enough, one of my staff had a contact elsewhere in City Hall that started texting and saying that there was an active shooter. So there was a number of us in the stairway at the south end of the councillor offices. And, when we heard that, we sort of paused on the stairway. And again, you don't know what really to believe or what to trust. The fire alarm is telling you to get out of the building, but an active shooting situation, you shelter in place.
Exactly.
And so there's a bit of conflict there about what to do. And so, that exit door on the stairway takes us right out into Churchill Square. And so, my concern was that we were kind of potentially walking out into something more organized. So we kind of peeked through the slat of the door and didn't really see anything. We saw other people from City Hall congregating at the muster point, so we joined them there. And didn't really hear anything, didn't really know anything. Ultimately, somebody from the clerk's office came by and said, you know what, we're not all getting back into the building for quite a while, so please head to the library and stay at the Milner, go to the Milner Library. That's where you'll find a warm place to stand and to wait it out. So that's what we did.
this is obviously a sort of I mean, aside from the fact that there were no injuries or fatalities, which is just remarkable, this is a worst nightmare type situation. I was talking to a friend about this. She works at City Hall. I won't identify her. I was trying to wrap my mind around it. I said, if there's a class of grade 1 students in there that for the rest of their lives will remember this. And I imagine if I'm a parent and I hear and I know my kid's having a wonderful field trip day at City Hall, and then I hear there's an active shooter, it felt like an American situation to be in. It's kind of been normalized in the United States a little bit, but we don't have it happen in Canada. I mean, did this ever cross your mind as you're going to work every day at Edmonton City Hall that something like this could happen, that somebody could walk right in and start firing shots?
Well, so just a few things. First of all, that grade 1 class is from a school in the ward I represent. That was primarily why I was at City Hall today. Otherwise, I probably would have taken that meeting from home. It was yesterday's meeting. This might not sound great, but yesterday's meeting was a very ordinary meeting. It was a bureaucratic meeting. It was almost a checkbox kind of an exercise, something we have to do once a year. So that's why I would surmise so many councillors were taking it virtually. I was there to meet with that grade 1 class over lunch. So that was very much on my mind. Those kids were still there. And, in that hour and a half to 2 hours before we really got news, that was on my mind. And there was, as you mentioned earlier, there's some staff members there. So had it ever occurred to me, I can tell you that this might also sound a little bit odd, but during our inauguration ceremonies, that sort of takes place at the top of the stairs, halfway up the stairs that you enter into the council chamber with. And I have sat there twice now and kind of looked up at the upper reaches of City Hall and thought, in almost in a quite a joking way, but in a dark humor kind of a way. If somebody was up there, we're pretty vulnerable. There's not a lot of places to hide in this room. If somebody was really bent. But at the same time, you think, well, that's not us. That's not Edmonton. That's not, that's not really a concern here. Watching the news coverage, yesterday evening, and seeing all of this, the multi-camera crews and, the live hits and boy, I tell you, like it was really surreal to think that that's not just my city, but my workplace, my staff, my friends, my colleagues. It was pretty jarring for sure.
So, Councillor, obviously nobody, with integrity is going to start speculating about what may have motivated this shooter, what the end game may have been, the details there. I'm not sure it matters as much as the conversation about that accessibility, about how close, members of the public, disgruntled members of the public can get to their elected officials. Now, we've all seen how protective details work with, sort of main, let's say like with mayors or the premier, the president of the United States. Something happens, the detail comes in. It sounds like they whisked Mayor Sohi off the property. You're still there. A lot of people are still there. Are you starting to wonder? I would imagine you are right now, whether the entire structure of protective details and security needs to be overhauled. Like when you're going to walk right back into that building, the next time you do, unless repair crews have got to it, you're going to see busted out windows. I would imagine that this is something that's going to stick with you.
Oh, it's going to stick. The stickiness of this is going to be is pretty big. That crossed my mind. When you first join council, you fill out, reams of paperwork. Who are your relatives? Where do your kids go? Where do they work? What's the phone number for your partner? That kind of stuff. And, I none of that was sort of activated, and I'm not complaining. Let me first say that there is a distinction between being the mayor of the city and being a councillor of the city. And, Mayor Sohi has, as he absolutely should, has access to perhaps more security information, more pertinent information in the moment.
Right.
He's the top diplomat for our city. So, it ought to be different. But there's sort of two counter threads here. I felt exposed. No one was proactively, from a security sense, no one was proactively making sure that I was safe. We have a group chat amongst all councillors and the clerk, and there were certainly messages going back and forth. Hey, where are you? Hey, where's your staff? That kind of thing. So there was certainly some communication. I don't want to sound overly critical. but nobody from City Hall security or the police service reached out to me and said, "Hey, where are you at?" And in that moment, you don't know if it's, like you said earlier, you don't know if somebody's being targeted. So is someone going to go check my house? Is someone going to check on my kids? None of that was activated. None of that was even part of the conversation. But I will also say this, Ryan. We were evacuated from City Hall and told pretty quickly we were not getting back in that building. But I was not going very far. My staff and I were working to try to manage expectations of meetings I had. I wasn't sure about this classroom full of kids. I wasn't sure about my staff, how they were getting home, how they were feeling. The captain kind of goes down with the ship, right? And my ship is my staffers and the ward I represent. And I wasn't going to go very far until I at least had some confidence that everything was under control. Now, I don't want to be a distraction. I don't want to be another problem for people to solve. So I'm not going to stay in the heart of the emergency, but I'm not going to stray very far from that place either, right? And that's my personal inclination, and that might be in conflict with what a security person says in terms of where they want you to go and what they want you to do as an elected official. So there's a lot to go through there, right?
I know that most politicians will acknowledge that you don't want that look of armed, heavily armed security at the front doors of City Hall or metal detectors at the very front door. But I also think of a situation like this that. And I don't mean to diminish the significance when I say it could have been much worse, but it could have been much worse. And whether it's the mayor, you, or staffers, people that are in that building, like sitting ducks, I don't know, something like this is a real wake-up call.
I think that there's going to be some details that come out in the proper course of time that will substantiate that concern, that this could have been so much worse. Yeah. So we'll let all that play out through the proper channels, that kind of a thing. This is the way it was explained to me when I first got there, Ryan. The way our city council chamber is crafted is that we have, council on one part of the circle. We have our administration, one step down in the middle of the circle facing council and informing council. But the highest seats and the other half of the circle are the public. They are our constituents. They are, our stakeholders, our shareholders, our vested partners. And that's the way it's supposed to be. There's a hierarchy there, the public, and then their elected representatives, and then the administration. That is the way I understood the building was designed and the way the building was, or at least the chamber was intended to represent. And perhaps more, I don't know, in a different way, the Municipal Government Act says that City Council must do everything in public. It must do all of its deliberations in public. It must decide in public. There's nothing similar to a behind-the-scenes caucus meeting that is permitted by councillors. So, that very public ethic is the essence of municipal government, particularly in Edmonton. There's no party politics. It's 13 individuals coming together in a consensus model, meeting with the public to make the best decisions. Something's going to change here. If for no other reason, then we've got a lot of people that support us that are, employees of the corporation of the city of Edmonton, and we have to make sure that they feel safe coming to work in this building. And that trust, that safety has been severely compromised at the very least.
Severely. We don't wait until somebody gets killed until we make changes. Anybody that's been in a court of law anywhere in Canada knows that you can't walk in and get right close to the judge without running through metal detectors and security that is armed at our courthouses. I said this to your colleague, to the mayor. I'll say it to you as well. Yeah. Just so very grateful that this wasn't worse, not to diminish the psychological impact of all of this, of course. But I want to thank you for making time for us. I understand that you and your colleagues obviously will have a lot to think about today and in the days moving forward, Councillor.
We will. Thanks very much for the opportunity, Ryan. Great to speak with you today.
You got it. Wanted to get a couple of different angles on what yesterday was like, January 23rd, down at Edmonton City Hall. That's Councillor Tim Cartmell. I see from David in our live chat on YouTube says it's very clear in this day and age that we need more protection in place for elected officials, stricter gun controls, higher security measures. I've seen some people musing in our chat wondering, is the gun legally registered? Is the gun legally owned? I saw somebody make a point as well that says maybe we should be talking, I think it was Garth maybe, that said maybe we should be talking a little bit more about the human being holding the gun. There's probably a little from column A, a little from column B there, but obviously it's extremely concerning. The video is remarkable.
Some scary stuff. We're seeing it right now here.
We'll say the alleged shooter, because that's how you report these types of things. The alleged shooter appears to be dressed like a security guard or in some sort of official-looking outfit. Johnny appears to be
definitely
wearing a
trying
bulletproof
to impersonate someone.
Looks like he's impersonating a security officer. We don't know about the motivation. There's a lot of rumors flying around, and that's not what we do on this. Well, we'll talk about political rumors, but we won't talk about rumors involving the deadly serious stuff like this. I see another comment. I almost don't want to read this, but I mean, it's just so stupid. I think that it needs to be addressed. In our live chat, Chris says, pick another job then. We don't have the luxury of security 24/7 here in the real world. You don't need it, man. You're not the mayor. And I'm pretty sure you don't have people showing up armed with Molotov cocktails and firearms, taking shots wherever you work, Chris. I mean, come on. You can't be serious about that. And we've got to take the safety and security of politicians seriously. In the United States, we've seen it with like Gabby Giffords getting shot in the head. I mean, we've seen American presidents shot and killed, or they shot and survived, like Ronald Reagan. I mean, we've seen even Canadian prime ministers. And I mean, everybody jokes about the Shawinigan handshake, but what about the protester that got close enough to choke or attempt to choke Jean Chrétien? What about the protester that got close enough to slam a pie into Premier Ralph Klein's face? What about the protesters that get close enough? You remember the man up in Grand Prairie that was berating Chrystia Freeland.
Of course.
This big, tall 300-pounder that's, screaming expletives at her and following her into the elevator. Do we need to wait until there's a fatality?
No.
Until we take this seriously?
It's what's really scary, and I like that Tim and the mayor said this, is that this guy, it seemed like he came in looking for someone and couldn't find anybody because, like they said, everyone was remotely. But he was still, the video, he's shooting through windows. He doesn't know who's on the other side.
Blowing up glass everywhere.
If this was a packed day, if this was a day when there was a council meeting and everyone was in there, there would have definitely been people dead. I don't know if he knew that it was not going to be many people there and that's why he chose that day, but who cares if the gun was legal? Who cares about security outside? We're talking about elected officials. There was a reason this guy went there.
Think about those kids too, man.
Oh, and grade one students.
Unbelievable. A lot of people are saying, well, hopefully, a lot of you are saying, I don't remember grade one. I don't remember a lot from when I was 6. I don't know about active shooters and police escorting you out of a field trip, but
kids absorb.
Kids absorb. But regardless, I hope they do forget about it. And we'll wish their parents grace and wisdom as they continue to talk to those young ones. Now, listen. This is a developing story. A lot of times on Real Talk, we're planning our shows ahead of time, and a lot of times there's developing news and breaking news, so to speak, that we know that this audience will be interested in. We did have a show lined up, and in just a second, we're going to talk to political scientist Dr. Jared Wesley, Democracy Under Threat, the new feature in Alberta Views. He's going to be getting into that on the legal side, on the Chief Medical Officer of Health side, and Luke LeBrun is going to join us today. He's the editor of Press Progress. Luke's been following that Emergencies Act inquiry. Interesting development. Ruling out of the courts that maybe the Emergencies Act being invoked was the wrong move, but it's not the win that Convoy supporters might think it is. Luke's going to get into that with us in just a second. These conversations are happening with the support of Real Talk partners like California Closets, who's here for you right now as you're looking to make your New Year's resolution happen. You promised yourself you would declutter and get organized. Nobody's better at getting you on the right track in that context than California Closets. They can do primary bedrooms. They can give you that dream walk-in closet you've always wanted. California Closets can transform your garage, your living room, your laundry room, your guest room. You get the idea. And it all starts with a free consultation at californiaclosets.ca. Hey, if you're a skilled worker, maybe you're a journeyman electrician or an apprentice that's on their way to getting their ticket. If you're a sales professional, if you're an engineer, how about an office administrator? you get the idea. Kubi Renewable Energy is hiring across the board. You want to work in Calgary? You want to work in Edmonton? How about Lethbridge? How about Kamloops? If you want to travel across BC and Alberta or work from home, there's probably a fit for you with Canada's fastest growing and busiest solar installer. Kubi Renewable Energy is driving Canada's green energy movement, and they want you to be a part of it. You can check out the careers link at kubienergy.ca. So you're going, well, that sounds pretty good, but I got to get schooled up first. Or maybe it's another opportunity in the job market you're looking to pursue. You know, tens of thousands of Canadians trust the process at Athabasca University. And why do they love it? Because it's designed to be a perfect fit no matter your situation, no matter your location, no matter your background with a post-secondary education or not. There's a role for you, a place for you at Canada's Open University. And one of the best parts about it, your only commute is to your device. Unbelievable return on investment. You can check it all out at athabascau.ca. More than 94% of AU alumni say they're satisfied with the quality of their education. Get the ball rolling with your path at athabascau.ca. And before we get to Dr. Wesley, a quick note from our friends at Eden Landscaping. You know, all the news through the summer was about floods and wildfires. There is no doubt that climate and weather patterns are changing, and intuitive landscape design needs to reflect that as well. People are going to be doing different things with their irrigation and drainage. People are going to be putting different plants in there. You got to have a landscape designer that understands where we are right now and where we're going. Eden Landscaping is a custom builder with more than 20 years of on-the-ground experience in Edmonton and area. And your first conversation with them is, of course, on the house. Get that design conversation started today with Eden Landscaping at landscapeedmonton.ca. I want to thank Dr. Jared Wesley for his flexibility. You and I were to be speaking out of the gates today, but obviously developing news out of Edmonton's City Hall. Kind of a remarkable story. Yourself, an academic, but also just as a general citizen. How are you wrapping your mind around what happened at City Hall in Edmonton yesterday?
Well, I mean, it's pretty personal. I have a grade 1er at home, right? And so my immediate thought was, what would I do as a parent to try to protect my kid? And I know that counselors and staff there and the parents that were involved in that field trip were definitely going through that in their minds. And we don't know. You made this point repeatedly. We don't know the motivations. We don't know, what was behind it. But it does raise some questions about an alarming pattern throughout North America, throughout the world right now, with elected officials under increasing threat from folks who are taking us out of what democracy is intended to do. And you go back to the origins of democracy, it was an alternative to violence. And there are some folks that take those matters into their own hands and invoke that violence. That is worrying. It's also, it'd be remiss if I didn't mention that members of our academic community are under threat, particularly women, particularly people from Black communities, Muslim communities, and so on. There was an attack just last year in Ontario University involving that, and U of A is taking security measures to try to protect our faculty. So this isn't just about elected officials. I know that's the conversation we might be having over the next few weeks, but it's about people that are trying to disturb, the peaceful discussion and debate about public policy, which is at the heart of our democracy.
I mean, it's interesting timing. I'm not trying to be cute by segueing to this, but we had you booked already to talk about this, the January-February issue of Alberta Views magazine. You're a contributor actually on a couple of different fronts in this episode, in this issue rather. The headline, the front page, the cover of the magazine, Democracy Under Threat, and it delves into the different ways and the different contexts in which this is happening. You have an opinion piece in here, a longer form piece on how democracy will fail without an independent judicial system. Take us into this for people that haven't yet read it at albertaviews.ca.
Yeah, and I just say Alberta Views, fantastic publication that gets into some of these details in great depth, so thank you to them for letting me go into it. Really, impetus for the piece was the Ethics Commissioner's report, which came out during the election campaign, right, talking about how Premier Danielle Smith had taken steps to interfere with the prosecution of Artur Pulaski. Folks may not remember that. It seems like decades ago
Doesn't
now.
it? I know.
Right? And part of her recommendations in that report was that MLAs require some kind of training on the basics of democracy, including, in her mind, including the separation between the three branches of government, which some of your listeners may be going back in their minds. I know two, maybe one or two of them, but we don't go through this on a daily basis to know the difference between what the legislative, executive, and judicial branch. We probably should expect that our politicians do, though. And so this piece goes into how we might rejig some of the training of MLAs to take it a little bit deeper on their role in preserving our democratic institutions.
Do you think that politicians these days, and I'm asking the question very generally, you can answer it however you like, of course, are politicians playing a little more fast and loose with the rules, with more unconventional politicians achieving significant office in Canada, the United States, and around the world, or has this always been happening?
I think it's a bit of both. So we know that we have folks that are coming in from different occupational backgrounds than there were a generation or two generations ago. And you needn't look no further than the struggles that a lot of governments, including the government of Alberta, historically has had to try to find a justice minister who has a legal degree. Right? There's only been one, maybe two in the last few governments that they could actually pick and say, we need somebody with legal experience to serve as justice minister. Now, bringing people in from different backgrounds isn't a bad thing, right? I mean, it offers an opportunity for more and diverse voices. But what it requires us to do is move beyond the assumption that these folks know what they're doing when they get into office. Sometimes they get into office not even expecting to win an election. We remember the Jack Layton group that came in with a bunch of MPs back in that election that he surprised everyone with. The Notley New Democrats would be the first to admit when they formed office in 2015, they didn't have a very experienced group that knew a lot about parliamentary politics, and that's one of the reasons why they shrunk their cabinet to the size that they did. In the piece, I talk about how we can't assume that MLAs know the basics of how democracy works, but more importantly, their crucial role in upholding some of these important principles, like the separation between the judiciary and the executive.
So what are you going to say to the person that says, that chirps you on Twitter from their anonymous account and then says, oh, Dr. Wesley, here you go again with the hyperbole. Here you go, lighting your beard on fire, I'll say. Democracy will fail without an independent judicial system. Give me a break. Democracy's not going to fail. I mean, that's a pretty bold statement to me.
Well, I mean, at the root of it is the rule of law, right? Which says quite simply, nobody's above or below the law. Everyone, regardless of their station in life, should have a fair treatment in front of an impartial judge, right? I mean, this is what's at the root of the controversy, not just involving Pulaski here in Alberta, but as we go into in the piece, the controversy surrounding SNC-Lavalin, right? I mean, this is a group of politicians that saw it as their business to wade into the job of judges. And this is a pattern here in Alberta too, where the Sovereignty Act, for example, handed power over to the Alberta legislature that belonged to the courts, handed over power to the executive that belonged to the legislature. I'd like to think that the advisors around politicians are smart enough to guide them in the right direction, but history's told us otherwise.
Yeah, but also rot is deep, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it was it Jean Chrétien's 90th birthday, I think, that everyone was just observing. And for people that are legitimately rolling out a synopsis of his political career, you can't ignore the sponsorship scandal, which was a really big deal. I mean, this isn't necessarily, I mean, you may have more current offenders, but it's not even, you referenced the NDP government in Alberta, necessarily a partisan thing, or do you see trends along those lines?
No, I don't look at this as a partisan issue. I think the Alberta government's done a great job of giving us more examples than we've seen in recent memory, but it definitely cuts across all lines. I would say, though, that, whether we're talking about scandal, whether we're talking about a case of clear ethics violations, if not legal violations, we have to remind citizens that it's their job to be paying attention, and it's their job to be contacting their MLAs when they see, clearly abhorrent behavior that's threatening these core democratic principles, right? So to Chrétien's point, they didn't get away with it. Sure, they won a minority government after Martin squeaked one out in the 2004 election, but eventually Canadians turfed them. And we do know that the sponsorship scandal was a key component of that transition in power. Albertans voted on the Premier's record and Justice Ministers as well as we go into the piece, who called up a chief of police to try to get out of a speeding ticket, right?
Unbelievable.
Right? I mean, but Albertans...
Distracted driving.
Right, distracted driving.
Yeah.
Sorry, thank you for the clarification.
Well, I don't want to be called out,
Right. But so at the end of the day, Albertans had their chance to weigh in on that. And they said through their ballots that they were, most of them, okay with it. And maybe it's that they weren't okay with that necessarily, but they were willing to put that behind other priorities that they had, right? But that's what's really the safeguard in this system is when Albertans, Canadians more generally, start to think about how these institutions are eroding, they need to start signaling to their politicians that enough is enough.
You reference, for obvious reasons, the Honourable Marguerite Tressler, King's Counsel, the Ethics Commissioner in Alberta, and we're going to talk to you in just a second before we wrap about the Chief Medical Officer of Health. We know, I've talked to you about this even before, about how members of the public are seeing some of their confidence, their faith eroded in public institutions. We see trends en masse. People say they have less faith in the media. They have less faith in educational institutions. They have less faith in the healthcare system and the professionals there. Perhaps some of these voices just louder than ever before. Do you get the sense that people still have confidence in offices like the Ethics Commissioner? I mean, we get 10 emails a week about people that have no faith in the Alberta Energy Regulator anymore. I'm not drawing a direct line between the two, but this is a trend.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking in our next Alberta or Viewpoint Alberta poll, we'll throw podcasters into that.
Yeah, maybe do.
See whether trust is eroding.
I appreciate you dragging us into this.
No. What we found, though, through our polling is that people have more faith in the institutions than they do in the people that occupy them.
Interesting.
Right? So there is a foundational belief that the system itself is pretty good. I mean, we see this time after time when governments have gone to electors and said, hey, do you want to change the electoral system? Hey, do you want to change, key parts of our democratic system? And Canadians say, no, the system's working okay. We just want you folks to work better, right? We want you to work together. We want you to work ethically. So the piece on the Chief Medical Officer of Health, I made that argument. I think the system itself is set up for success, but it relies on people within it to know what they're doing and to act honorably. And we did not see that happen. I'm not saying it was our Chief Medical Officer of Health that acted unhonorably in that situation, but folks around her did.
Let me ask you this before we thank you for your time, and thanks again for your flexibility this morning. I love the dialogue feature that Alberta Views rolls out, where they bring in really smart people that take different and conflicting positions on an important question and argue it. And this one, in the January-February issue of Alberta Views, should the Chief Medical Officer of Health have more independence from Cabinet? People understood, I think, the role of the Chief Medical Officer of Health way more during and after COVID, the pandemic, than they did before. In Alberta, BC, you knew Bonnie Henry. In Alberta, you knew Dina Hinshaw, and she was a hero, and then she wasn't, and then she was maybe sort of like a hero again when people are, having more light shone on it. Whether or not her advice was being taken by Cabinet was being debated, whether or not the health minister was listening to the chief medical. You get the idea. So Dr. Mark Joffe is Alberta's new Chief Medical Officer of Health. And I'm talking to Dr. Paul Parks, like maybe about a month ago, president of the Alberta Medical Association. And I say, Dr. Parks, don't you think it's strange that with COVID numbers rising again in ERs and respiratory therapists and physicians, ER physicians telling us that they're really concerned about this, and flu season's underway, aren't you concerned we're not seeing more of the Chief Medical Officer of Health? And he says, yes. And I go, this is interesting. And he goes, but I know Dr. Joffe, and I know he's a professional, and I have to wonder why they're keeping him out of the spotlight. He didn't wonder why Dr. Joffe wasn't stepping in front of the microphone. He hinted that there might be other factors at play. Do you wonder about that?
No, well, we study chief medical officers of health across the country. First thing to know is that their role is very different from province to province. Legislatively, they have very different roles. Bonnie Henry's scope of latitude is very different from Dina Hinshaw's. But secondly, I would say it's a personality thing. So I won't go into the inside details of Dr. Joffe and his own approach. But there are some instances where the chief medical officer of health wouldn't want to step in front of cameras to address it because they've provided their advice behind closed doors and they feel like it's a politician that should take the responsibility, as they should under our system of government, for decisions that were made. So I'm not going to weigh into those decisions other than to say that it's really a person-to-person, case-to-case issue to issue thing, right? But the point that I make in my half of this debate is that folks that want to see the chief medical officer of health have more independence, right, to have their own microphone, to be able to make their own decisions, I think need to reconsider when you think about if you have this position be more independent, they will have more latitude, and you may not be able to control or hold them accountable, right? As flawed as our system of representative democracy is, at least Albertans have the ability to weigh in if they disagree with a decision. I always tell people, if you like technocracy, putting an independent person out there making decisions, that's all fine and well until you don't get to pick the technocrat. And I can guarantee you, if you give the government, if the government makes that position more independent, they will pick someone who they know is going to fall in line with them ideologically. And so there are all kinds of risks that we go into in this debate with my colleagues that I hope folks will have a read.
Yeah, there's many fascinating debates over the course of COVID. I can only speak to our home province of Alberta and even speaking with friends and colleagues of mine. Should Dr. Hinshaw at that time be the one making the call on whether or not businesses were closing or what the rules would be around it? Or should it be the politicians at that time, Minister Tyler Shandro, Premier Jason Kenney? And it is a compelling argument that, number one, having unelected officials in positions of that much authority and influence is potentially troubling. And number two, the whole point of elections is the majority of people, or the majority of those who turn out to vote, choosing who will be making those decisions when those decisions need to be made. And that's tough to argue. Whether or not you like the incumbent, whether or not you like who the health minister is or the premier is, that's what it's all about.
It is, and that's what ties the two pieces together, right? I think Albertans, more than anybody else in Canada, have realized over the last decade that elections have consequences. And it's not just about picking governments, it's about picking individual MLAs who will represent them throughout the course of a legislature. We learned through COVID that a policy platform only takes you so far when you have a massive crisis that you have to address, and you have to fall back on the people that are in the room. And I think Albertans have got a good group of people in the room. It's probably the most talented and decorated group of MLAs we've had in a long time. It's a very substantial, big opposition. So if we can empower those MLAs, give them the information that they need in order to do their job effectively and hold the government accountable on our behalf, that's what I think we should aim for.
You can read Dr. Jared Wesley's work in the January-February issue of Alberta Views magazine, Democracy Under Threat. And I want to direct you to albertaviews.ca. If you're not yet a subscriber, I encourage you to do so. Number one, to support independent, long-form, fact-checked journalism. And number two, just to school yourself up on issues that matter, to read those different perspectives and put them through your own test. See whether or not the way you felt before is the way you feel after. You go to albertaviews.ca, you click on subscribe, and if you use the promo code AVRJ, that's Alberta Views, Ryan Jesperson, AVRJ, they're going to knock 50% off a one-year subscription, which means it's delivered to your door, 10 issues for $20, if you can believe it. $20. I think they should charge more, but $20, and you can get that delivered right to your door. Hey, thanks for doing this, man. It's always very good to see you.
Always a pleasure, Ryan.
You got it. That's U of A political scientist, Dr. Jared Wesley. We're going to check in with Luke LeBrun coming up in 90 seconds. He's the editor of Press Progress, and he's been doing a great job helping Canadians understand the ramifications of this court ruling that the Emergencies Act being invoked, in fact, sort of trampled on people's charter rights. That's what the federal court says. But what does that ultimately mean? It may not be the win that Convoy supporters think it is. That's coming up in 90 seconds. But you know our tradition. Every Wednesday, courtesy of our friends at Tourism Jasper, we head out to the mountains and remind you about the memories that are there to be made. It's MyJasper Memories, and of course this month in Jasper, a very special one, as they observe the institution that is Jasper in January. I shared some of my memories last Wednesday. I was lucky enough to get out there and sample some of the fare and just obviously take in the natural beauty there as well. But a ton of events, including coming up this week on January 25th, the Poutine Showdown. They've also got a great improv night coming up. It's a way to kick off the weekend a little bit early with a new cultural event, a terrific showcase of Jasper's diverse local talent. Coming up this Friday, and these are unique events to this weekend. You've got the wildlife tours in the morning. Maybe if you've never been to Jasper before, maybe you've never seen all those elk up close, maybe those big mountain goats, the rams, all of those wildlife that people come from all around the world to see. They've got their Festival of Galaxies happening as well. You can get either the planetarium experience or the telescope and planetarium combo. See the stars through the most powerful telescopes in the Rockies. And then Pride Night's coming up this weekend, featuring LGBTQ2S+ performers and DJs. The event will be rocking all night long in a safe and inclusive space. They've also got workshops going on this weekend on Saturday with Indigenous knowledge keeper Matricia Bauer. They have demo days going on at Marmot Basin. They're going to have some beautiful snow conditions out there at Marmot this weekend. Test drive all their best gear. Doesn't cost you a thing. And then they've got their street party and fireworks going on Saturday night. You know, this is the only time of year you're going to see fireworks in Jasper. They've really dialed them back, but they fire it up as they wrap up Jasper in January. They've got ice climbing tours coming up this Sunday, as well as lights tours and live music going on Sunday evening. You can find out all the details. Make your perfect itinerary. Make your own MyJasper Memories by checking out jasper.travel/January. You can just follow the link in the show notes as well. MyJasper Memories is presented Wednesdays on Real Talk by our wonderful friends at Tourism Jasper. Our next guest, I happen to know, was strapped on his skis yesterday in La Belle Province in Quebec, riding a chairlift when he got back to us and let us know he could make himself available for an interview. He's the editor of Press Progress, does a great job. Luke LeBrun, it's great to see you. Number one, let me say thank you for your flexibility today. Our show lineup shuffled a little bit, and we appreciate you making time for us still. How were the conditions in Quebec? You had a wonderful day on the slopes yesterday, or what?
It was all right. It was all right. It was a little bit warmer on the weekend. It was very, very cold, like -20, and yesterday was about -5. So
that's perfect.
Pretty good.
I'll ride a chairlift in -5 all day long. -20 is a bit of a different story, I think. Hey, Luke, you've been doing a lot of work, and I should mention as well as part of your introduction here that you are also the guy behind convoywatch.ca. So I know that you've been keeping an eye for quite some time on what's happened around that trucker convoy across the country, on the Ottawa Occupation, and obviously the fallout from that. A court ruling this week put this story back in front of Canadians, and it's got people wondering about whether or not that Emergencies Act should have been invoked. Federal court says no. Can you take us into this?
Yeah, sure. I mean, to begin, this weekend is going to be the 2-year anniversary of the Freedom Convoy. And can you, put yourself back 2 years. Can you imagine that we're still talking about it, at this point? Like, it's kind of mind-boggling.
It is.
I guess that speaks to how big of an impact the Freedom Convoy has had on Canadian politics. So this ruling that came out, I mean, first of all, it was, just to give you some background context, it was brought forward by a number of people who, some of them were involved with anti-vaccine groups. Interestingly, the judge actually dismissed the case of one of the main parties in it because he said they had no standing, and he actually was angry with their lawyer because he was "quote unquote" grandstanding during the hearings. So the civil liberties groups were granted public interest standing, and according to the judge, he found that their arguments were quite persuasive in his ultimate ruling. And I think it is important to say at the outset that there are some real civil liberties issues that are at play here, and competing interests, right? On one hand, I mean, genuine, legitimate issues when it comes to civil liberties, but then on the other hand, especially in Ottawa, the rights of Ottawa residents to go about their life, peacefully and enjoying their lives and rights and what have you. So the ruling that we got yesterday, or I should say the decision, basically it's kind of a technical reading of the Emergencies Act, like the language in the act. And what it does is it kind of hones in on two questions. So first of all, was it an actual national emergency? And also, was there a threat to national security, essentially? And if you read the decision, I think the Justice Mosley makes some, fair, if not maybe pedantic points, and kind of asks, was this actually a national emergency? And what he ends up concluding is that he acknowledges that there was a serious emergency in Coots and in Windsor, but he said that, ultimately the police in those areas were able to control it with the existing laws and existing tools that they had at their disposal. Whereas he also admits that in Ottawa, things had just broken down and had become so lawless that there was no way that the police were going to handle it on their own. So based on that, he basically says, this wasn't really a national emergency. It was more an Ottawa emergency. And so that was one of the arguments that, or one of the things that kind of guided his analysis. Another point too is, he just talks about threats to national security. He acknowledges that there were valid concerns when it came to the question of national security threats, but he ends up kind of defining national security threat as some kind of bodily harm or serious violence that might cause bodily harm. And so, while he acknowledges that, for example, in Coots, weapons were seized, and while he acknowledges that in Ottawa, there were people on the streets who were being physically assaulted, he basically says that this didn't really rise to the level of national security threat, according to his technical interpretation of, as it is set out in the act. I'm not a lawyer. I will defer to other people about whether or not that's a good decision, but that's kind of the context of what this decision actually is. It's not important to note. It's not the judge was not asked to decide whether or not the Freedom Convoy had a point. He was not asked to decide whether or not the Freedom Convoy was good. It's nothing like that. He's kind of very narrowly trying to see if it was reasonable to invoke the Emergencies Act based on the language in the law.
So, Luke, it's a fascinating ruling. On our live chat right now, Donald says this wasn't even close to a national emergency. I know that, let's get into the ruling a little bit. Justice Mosley says that invoking the Emergencies Act unreasonable because the threat to the security of Canada did not mean simply a general sort of a danger to the Canadian way of life, but it has to require the use of CSIS definition, which would be a threat or use of serious violence against people or property. Now, that I think you could make the argument that in Coots, it was serious as hell, with a cache of weapons seized, obviously attempted murder. I mean, there's the charges later about as serious as it gets, but that was not the case in Ottawa. And I thought that your take on this, the point you make from your Twitter account yesterday, valuable as well. And I want to pick your brain on this because it's an interesting one. You say, I'm not sure that Convoy supporters that are celebrating this ruling have read it closely. The judge notes that if he was the government, he probably would have invoked it too. So the ruling is that it goes against the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, that it was not justified, yet at the same time the judge says, but I probably would have done it as well. So where does that leave the average Canadian that's trying to wrap their mind around this and maybe future implications?
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's two dimensions to this, right? There is the, legal side of it. And, again, not a lawyer. I'll leave that to someone with more expertise to comment on whether or not the judge made the right decision. It's obviously going to go to appeal. So, that is what it is. There's also a political dimension to this. And obviously, if you're a Convoy supporter, you're going to hold this up and claim that it is vindicating you. You've seen Pierre Poilievre kind of seizing on this and, trying to use it, as Pierre Poilievre should, because this is, something that he can make political hay out of.
Yep.
He's going to point to this as an example of Justin Trudeau, violating the rights of Canadians and sort of acting as a dictator and criticizing Trudeau for that. And, that's his prerogative. And, this is politics, and that's Pierre Poilievre's job, frankly. But yeah, so just in terms of vindicating the Convoy, like if you actually read the ruling itself, he starts his Justice Mosley starts his conclusion by noting that he is coming into this with the benefit of hindsight. He has more information than Cabinet had at the time, and he also says that he acknowledges that at the point that they invoked the Emergencies Act, this had gone way beyond, a legitimate protest. There had been a serious breakdown in public order. Like, he acknowledges that this had all happened. And as you say in the bit that you quoted, he says that basically if he had been in government, if he had been in cabinet, he might have been inclined to make the same decision based on what they knew at the time. So if you're going to, if you're going to try to make political hay out of that, I think it is important to note that the justice does note that as well. Just throughout the entire ruling, he keeps saying, keeps noting that the Convoy supporters who were in Ottawa and elsewhere were engaging in criminal and violent activity. He notes that they were promoting hateful messages. He notes that there were far-right extremists, some of whom were actually calling for January 6th type insurrections.
Right.
This is all stuff that the justice acknowledges, even while, at the end concluding that he didn't find it reasonable to invoke the Emergencies Act.
There's the financial implication as well. And in our live chat on YouTube right now, a lot of people are touching on that. I'll quote Alberta Girl, who says, I have always argued that the majority of Canadians had their charter rights infringed upon by the border blockade and the occupation of our national capital. Our economy was being strangled. I mean, there was a very real, I don't remember the specific number, Luke, maybe you do, but even that the closure of the Windsor Bridge, it was estimated that was costing Canadians and Americans hundreds of millions of dollars a day. So at some point you got to shut that down. The question is, as the threat looms of future trucker convoys or future occupations, how are they managed? And obviously the Ottawa police came under fire for this. The then Ottawa mayor came under fire. Premier Doug Ford came under fire. Obviously the federal government did as well. There's a lot of contemplation and reflection to go around, to say the least.
Yeah, and I mean, if you read the decision kind of with that political lens, I think one of the questions that you would, I think it begs is, what else could the government have done at that point? The Justice Mosley basically concludes that, there were laws that existed that should have handled this without the government needing to invoke the Emergencies Act. I will say, as someone who is an Ottawa resident, I'm still scratching my head why the bylaw officers were not able to issue tickets to some of these vehicles. Like, a lot of stuff doesn't make sense in terms of why there was a breakdown and why laws weren't being enforced. But the fact of the matter is, 3 weeks into this thing, clearly something was broken, and this, invoking the Emergencies Act, whether you agree with it or not, did end up doing something that led to its conclusion. But yeah, it's interesting also. I think that that question that comes out of this decision kind of dovetails interestingly with the Emergencies Act inquiry and Justice Rouleau's report, because in his report, Justice Rouleau concludes basically that at the end of the day, the Freedom Convoy was a failure of federalism and a failure of policing. And, if you go back and look at the Emergencies Act inquiry, there is just a plethora of evidence to suggest that, police were fighting with one another, like within the Ottawa Police Service. I mean, some of the top police leaders were, at each other's throats. Then you had situations where the Ottawa Police were arguing with the OPP and the RCMP, and it was like, one of those like cop TV shows where everybody's kind of fighting over jurisdiction and telling everyone to stay off their turf, like that kind of a thing.
It's our investigation.
There's a lot of that.
Yeah, but it was the opposite. In the TV shows, they want control of the investigation. With the convoy, nobody wanted it.
Exactly. Yeah, everyone was standing back. No one wanted to own it. They want someone else to take it. That was the case with Doug Ford in Ontario. Doug Ford went snowmobiling in the Muskokas during the Freedom Convoy. And, it seemed pretty clear that Doug Ford did not want anything to do with this. He wanted this to be Justin Trudeau's problem. He felt also that, the people who were protesting in Ottawa were directing it at the federal government. So it's kind of Justin Trudeau's problem to deal with and not his, except, Ottawa is a city in the province of Ontario. And when the, policing breaks down in the city of Ottawa, that's actually the province's problem to fix. And he was negligent. He wasn't there. He was absent. He was snowmobiling in the Muskokas, as I say. So, that kind of, I think it kind of leads back to the conclusion that Justice Rouleau ended up having. And then that kind of leaves us with the question of what else could have been done.
Yeah, we've got really great points. I want to, if you have a second, Luke, I'd love to get into some of the conversation on our live chat here. Lorraine says provinces ran for cover. They basically left it to the federal government to clean up the mess. What else was there to do? Plus the threats to police, the guns. I didn't see any reports of guns discovered in Ottawa, but certainly at Coots. Noob Try Again says, to your guest's point about bylaw not issuing tickets, like, would you want to be in one of their positions with a booklet walking into that lion's den to write tickets? Not without a few cops by my side. That's the thing. That's what I thought of, Luke, as well, is like, you got to think, like, I'm of two minds on this. Number one, that would certainly escalate the situation. But number two, what is the point of law enforcement if not to enforce the law? And I'm not trying to compare, occupiers to puppies, but like when you're training puppies, the more leash you give them and the more liberties you allow the puppy to take, the bigger nightmare you have when it's a 120-pound Rottweiler that has no standard of the expected behavior. Like if police and bylaw officers continue to allow occupiers to simply walk all over the rules for weeks and weeks and weeks, it's no wonder there's hot tubs and hundreds of jerry cans being brought in, because nobody's drawing the line. So I guess, to be honest with you, I'm on at least two minds on this one.
Yeah, I mean, it is fair to say that the Ottawa police were trying to use de-escalation tactics, and they were, there are many examples you can point to where they were, trying not to inflame the situation. And there are situations where, there were kind of crowds of people who were gathering around police, for example, in Confederation Park. This came up during the Emergencies Act inquiry. And the police were assaulted and were, had genuine fear for their safety. So yeah, sure, fair enough. But again, it's like, what was the solution? Clearly de-escalating wasn't working. We had a situation where you've got like 10 blocks of a city center that are just filled to the brim with trucks, even spilling over into the surrounding residential areas, like kind of two-story family homes. And there are people sleeping in sort of cars, and the stuff's just sprawled out everywhere. And, clearly the de-escalating tactics that they tried to deploy were not working. They didn't try, ticketing people. They didn't try, kind of escalating it a little bit further. So, I don't know what the solution would have been, but clearly they weren't trying all the things, making use of all the tools that they may have had at their disposal.
Yeah, here's an interesting point from Keith Carlson, who's watching this live on YouTube. I happen to know he's a town councillor down in Claresholm, Alberta, in the southern part of the province. He's the chef and owner of Roy's Place as well, with the best cinnamon buns in the province. Go check him out. Councillor Carlson says the restaurant suppliers had produce stuck and it was delivered spoiled by those blockades, and the cost to businesses with that stuff cost millions alone. He says Coots was a safety hazard. Interesting point from Ken, who's quite right in saying one key aspect of this was the inability of local law enforcement to force towing companies to use their resources, which clearly was important here. We need new laws to handle that behavior. Luke, I know you'll remember. I remember hearing directly from companies. We were trying to get them on the show, towing companies. And they would all talk to us off the record. None of them would do an interview, but they were like, if you think we're sending our trucks and our drivers to that border blockade to tow away big rigs and then deal with it for the next 30 years, it's like people who cross a picket line during a strike. Welcome to the rest of your career. They just weren't going to do it. There was no way. I mean, people were talking about the federal government should send in the army. The federal government should buy its own tow trucks. I don't know who you're going to get to drive them. Soldiers, maybe. I mean, it was really, there were a lot of tough situations. You and I could talk about this for hours.
Yeah, no, for sure. And the tow trucks were actually a topic that came up in the decision, and Justice Mosley kind of dismissed it as kind of not a big deal, even though that was one of the points that the federal government made for why they needed to invoke it, because there was no other way to actually, essentially just no other way to clear out the streets unless they, had those powers. And I think also some of the other points that you were mentioning from the live chat, my observation personally was that, especially comparing this decision with the Emergencies Act inquiry, it seemed like it got a lot less into the details. This decision, it kind of engaged much more on a much more shallow level with the specific, all these specific examples that we're talking about, and all of which are very relevant. Whereas I think the Emergencies Act inquiry, because it did go on longer and it had many, many witnesses, I think it ended up doing, maybe giving more weight to some of these concerns that people are raising and are, totally valid points.
We're talking to Luke LeBrun, editor of Press Progress. Before we let you get back to your day, Luke, let me just touch on this story that you published yesterday at pressprogress.ca. We'll have the link to it in the show notes here. Far-right convoy groups plan to occupy Canadian police stations until government officials are arrested. What's going on here?
Right. So some of these individuals were some of the Freedom Convoy organizers going back 2 years. Two of those individuals that you're showing on your screen right now, they're actually part of another convoy called the Save the Children Convoy, which came to Ottawa back in the fall. They actually set up a base camp out in Castleman, Ontario, sort of like farmland kind of area. So they kind of had this, I guess there were about 100, 150 people or so who were kind of living in this place where they set up kind of semi-permanent structures, living in RVs and that kind of a thing. Anyway, so they've been trying to, it's a very complicated movement. They're kind of motivated and inspired by some QAnon adjacent beliefs, a lot of sovereign citizen stuff where they have these pseudo legal beliefs about how the government works and how the law system works and that kind of a thing. So their new project that they are now focusing on, it basically involves them wanting to go into police stations and demanding the arrests and charges being placed against government officials. And they say that they're not going to leave until the police do what they say. And on this Zoom call, which happened on Monday night, where they had a sort of a planning meeting, they were talking about staying for weeks or even months at these police stations. It is kind of interesting to think of this story in connection with this decision, because I do genuinely wonder how groups like this will react to a decision that they think is validating them and that they think is siding with them. It may be the case that they end up feeling emboldened by a decision like this, which could be cause for concern.
Luke, really want to thank you for making time for us today, and as well for your flexibility on the timing of the interview. I know obviously you're a busy guy. If people want to check out the work that you're doing, I mentioned convoywatch.ca, which I know it's not totally funny, but it's basically become like a Randy Hillier focus page right now, like one of the biggest loons in Canadian political history, and I won't apologize for that in any way, shape, or form. And then they can read all of your good reporting at pressprogress.ca. Thanks for this, pal.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for having me on.
We really appreciate it. That's Luke LeBrun, editor of Press Progress. You can see it at pressprogress.ca.
Yeah, I was watching that video this morning of what is her name? What is that woman's name there? She's actually running for some sort of government.
Is that who I think it is?
It is Anne.
Is that I don't want to say the name.
PPC?
It is Dana Metcalf.
It is Dana Metcalf.
Dude.
So I'm watching this video this morning.
Yeah. This is hitting. Is this who I think it is from Edmonton?
It is, yes.
The business owner?
Well, I think she's from Newfoundland. Is she not?
Well, maybe originally. Oh my! This is. I'm realizing this as we're talking.
And this is
live.
why I wanted to talk about it. So I'm watching this video on the LRT this morning.
Oh, wow.
And it's going in and out because we're obviously going through tunnels. But scroll up on this picture. The thing about this that boggled my mind, she's putting herself at the top between evidence and social media.
Yeah.
And then her name, Dana Metcalf. So she's as trustworthy as evidence and social media. I watched the video and it was a long video. I will give her this. She's well-spoken. But I mean, some of the things she was saying about, billions of strands of DNA being implanted in us and stuff. I was just watching this on the train this morning and I was like, I'm pretty sure she's running for the PPC or whatever. So, yeah, this is just crazy. They're going to go and sit in police stations and
this is kind of,
I don't know what they're hoping to get out of this.
Well, I mean, occupying police stations, like Elizabeth in the chat says, like, our police stations, you're going to be doing military exercises? Like, what? She goes, are you feeling okay? Yeah, James says, Randy Hillier is still around? I mean, not exactly, but yeah, still in a way. Check out convoywatch.ca and you can read all of what Luke's done on it.
Yeah.
I used to work charity events with Dana Metcalf. I didn't realize this was her until like we're literally as we're talking here right now. And I'm just gonna, she's. I mean, hey, listen. So this, I'll just say this, kind of on the spot here. This is just another example, and there are many examples of people, and it's a fair word to use. Some may take issue with it, but people that have become radicalized over the years. And I'm not going to speak too much to Dana in particular, except to say that when I last spoke with her 10 years ago. You said that picture, and you said show the picture, and all of a sudden I'm looking at her going, is that who I think it is? Mm-hmm. She was radically normal. She's outspoken. She always has strong opinions.
She's intelligent.
I'm not her best friend, so I'm not going to provide insight into her character and all that. But I will say I have participated in charitable fundraising with her approximately 10 years ago. Haven't spoken with her since. But here they are talking about implants and all kinds of microchip stuff and the real stuff that would come across as quite wackadoodle. But I want to also reiterate that this show will never take a position that is simply mocking and dismissive of this type of stuff without putting due thought into consideration around how do people get to this point? What are the implications? What are the threats on general society? What are the takeaways? Where does our focus need to be? The timing of this all is very interesting as well, isn't it? As we're talking to you, I'll give you a bit of a clue, and I'm not wrapping the show yet, Johnny, but if you're listening to this on January 24th when we're doing it, tonight, Tucker Carlson is speaking in Edmonton to a big crowd at Rogers Place, like where the Oilers play. I'm going to be there. You can follow me on Twitter at Ryan Jesperson, and I'll be sending out some of my thoughts through it. And on Thursdays, on the January 25th episode of Real Talk, I'll be giving you sort of a synopsis of what went down, some of the, I think I can say this safely, more outrageous things that were said from the stage and the implications of that. But a lot of the crazy has gone mainstream in the sense that it's people in your orbit. It's people that you know, people that you probably care about or have cared about in past. And there are still wounds that are open, in some cases wounds that are festering with people's personal relationships, families that have been impacted, perhaps forever, as a result of the pandemic and the convoy and these occupations and the Save the Children stuff and everything else. And we take a look at what David Parker's doing at Take Back Alberta, and we take a look at some of these, special interest groups that I don't think any longer can be simply written off as the lunatic fringe, because the ramifications of groups of people feeling this way and taking actions on their feelings is becoming relevant to everybody.
100%. I just looked it up. So I'm not sure if the PPC is even a thing anymore in St. John's, but she did try to run in 2021, and she's actually going back into court. Here it is, for harassing the premier. She's going to be back premier of
I had no idea.
Newfoundland.
This
she'll be
flying under my radar.
Representing herself.
I'm going to reach out. I'll see if she'll do
charges,
the show. I'm going to reach out to her and see if she'll do the show. I think we're probably still connected on social media. That'll be interesting.
Wild, right?
I think that is wild. Especially it's hitting close to home for me. You're probably hearing the wheels in my brain working as I'm sort of putting this all together. James says people I went to university with who were completely normal are now way off the deep end. I also think, they would probably say to you, James, and to me, what is normal? They feel like we're hook, line, and sinker. They feel like we're the sheep, the sheeple, right? They feel like we're the ones that are being fooled and that are being manipulated. Yeah.
I'm over this convoy stuff. I mean, I see everyone thinking it's a win, but I still think back to this, and I still have the same opinion that if these were Indigenous people protesting, if these were climate activists, if these were animal activists, if these were any people from the left, or what conservatives would call fringe left, that they wouldn't have gone on that long. So the fact that it went on that long, it should be a good thing for them, because they got the exposure. But the fact that the judge even said, hey, yes, if you go to the definition of the law, they didn't do it properly. The government, overstepped some boundaries. But at the same time, I would have done the same thing because I would have been scared to death as well, right?
And remember how interesting, wasn't it, when Jason Kenney was elected Premier of Alberta, and what was his first order of business? Kenney's first order of business was Bill 1. Bill 1, it doesn't get any more out of the gates than that, and that was the Critical Infrastructure Defense Act. Do you remember that? That opponents said violated Albertans' rights to protest on public property, but it was Kenney's signal. Let's be honest. I mean, this is obvious. It was Kenney's signal to the oil and gas community and to oil and gas investors and to people who had freight traveling on railroads and otherwise that he wasn't going to stand for the bullshit anymore. Jason Kenney, under his watch, was not going to have railroads blockaded by Indigenous people or other people in the province. He was not going to have people chaining themselves. We don't have as much old growth as BC does, but chaining themselves to trees or doing what they could to vandalize oil derricks or whatever you have, pump jacks. That was Jason Kenney's move. And then all of a sudden, the people that were standing in the way of critical infrastructure were Jason Kenney's supporters. And it got really messy for him, didn't it? I mean, look at this. The Globe and Mail's reporting on Pierre Poilievre's response to Justice Mosley's ruling this week. Like Luke LeBrun said, obviously, Poilievre's going to make political hay out of this. What kind of a politician would he be if he didn't? But he says that it confirms, the ruling does, that Justin Trudeau's government broke the highest law in the land by invoking the Emergencies Act. He says a Poilievre government will ensure the Emergencies Act can never be used again to silence political opposition. Let's see how he feels when 3,000 environmentalists converge on Ottawa.
Exactly what I was thinking.
And set up their tents, and start burning incense and start stopping normal traffic movement in the nation's capital again.
Start throwing cans of soup on art in museums.
Gluing themselves to the floor. Yeah.
And if this was happening and those people were out there in droves, thousands of people, it would have been shut down so fast. And there would have been people all over online. I mean, it was happening to them too at the Convoy, but just making fun of them and saying this is a waste of time and get the police out there and blah, blah, blah. And I'm still under this opinion that it went on long enough. It's not like the Emergencies Act was like, they're out there, let's shut it down day one. This went on a long time, Ryan.
Yeah. I see some people here in the live chat asking where I'm sitting at Tucker Carlson. I'm not going to release that information, but I'll tell you what, if you see me on the concourse, come up and say hi. And if you're a real talker, what should our code word be? Our code word will be
Freezing Bros.
Freeze.
I don't know. Say one of our sponsors' names.
How about if you walk up to me this evening at Tucker Carlson and say #RealTalkRJ?
There you go.
As long as there's not a big lineup, I'll buy you a beer. How about that? That's
Is it
official.
This evening?
It's this evening.
He's in Calgary too, right?
He was in Calgary yesterday.
Yeah, I didn't even know there
did
was
a luncheon
double
in
show.
Calgary. There wasn't a ton of buzz on it.
Yeah.
I mean, at least mainstream. Obviously, a lot of news was happening yesterday too, and our focus was primarily on what was going down at Edmonton City Hall. I'll tell you a little bit about what's coming up on tomorrow's show in just a quick second. But let me remind you about something that's happening with our friends at Friesen Brothers.
There you go.
Speaking of the devil, attaboy Johnny. They're presenting the future of Alberta food. This is coming up on February 24th, but you're going to want to get your tickets ahead of time. They're presenting this in conjunction with Nate. It's an exciting culinary challenge that encompasses 6 teams of Alberta food professionals. These are the up-and-comers. These are the brilliant creators of today and tomorrow. Butchery, baking, culinary expertise, hospitality, creativity as well. Focusing on really great food, the 6 teams will apply traditional skills featuring high-quality Alberta proteins, veggies, to produce exceptional original dishes made from scratch. Now, here's the deal. You can be there to try these 24 delicious dishes in a stand-up reception. It goes February 24th in the evening, 6 p.m. at Ernest's Dining Room at Nate. You can find out more information and get your tickets. It will sell out. Get your tickets at friesen.com/challenge. We also wanted to mention our friends at Complete Care Restoration. This time of year, they're busier than they like. I mean, they say straight up. Obviously, they hate it when people have to call them. They would much rather nobody deal with flooding and fire and black mold and asbestos and all that nightmare stuff. But when it does happen, they are the only ones that are providing the most comprehensive care with complete peace of mind, the only ones that have earned our 2 thumbs up, and we say it with confidence. not because we're in a business partnership with them, but because they built our studio and we have seen them in action. Absolute professionalism. From emergency mitigation to detailed reconstruction, Complete Care Restoration handles every aspect with utmost care and dedication. You can find them online at completecarerestoration.ca. Terrelyn is leaving a comment in the chat saying that she still has mixed feelings when she sees a vehicle flying a Canadian flag. I was thinking about this the other week, and to be honest, because I saw one, and I pulled up beside the person, and you never know, but I just kind of quickly glanced over, and the person appeared to just be having a nice day. They were driving with a nice smile on their face. Now, were they a Convoy supporter? Maybe. But I wanted to believe that they were flying that flag for another reason, and it hit me at that moment that I think I have returned back to normal. I've returned back to that point where I can see the Canadian flag and feel good about it again.
It's so weird because you used to see the Canadian flag stickers on bumpers and you never thought of that. You were just like, hey, proud Canadian there.
Never.
And now you think, I wonder if I pull up beside them if they're wearing white Oakleys and smoking a dart.
You wonder, friend or foe? Coming up on Thursday's Real Talk, as mentioned, out of the gates, I'm going to tell you what I thought about Tucker Carlson's appearance in Edmonton. I'm going to give you a summary of Premier Danielle Smith's performance with them. We'll talk about the subjects discussed, the takeaway, and basically the need to know. Plus, what is going on with the Alberta Junior Hockey League? Have you heard this? 5 teams are leaving. They're now suspended. And who's getting screwed the most? The players. We're going to talk to Dustin Nielsen on Thursday's Real Talk.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jesperson.